Hello, my name is Devin Stevenson. I'm here doing my informative speech for my CST 100 class. I'm here to teach anyone that's interested, so anyone in the audience that's interested in particular about key leaders or in interesting facts about those key leaders in the Pacific Theater of World War II. The United States fought in the Pacific Theater from the attack on Pearl Harbor from 1941 to the dropping of the atomic bombs in 1945. The principal characters that I'm interested in World War II, principal characters I've been interested in World War II as long as I can remember. I've always had a great interest in United States history, but in particular World War II. The first person I would like to touch base on is General Douglas MacArthur. He grew up in a military family where his father was in the Army, was an officer in the United States Army. He got an appointment at West Point and graduated top of his class in 1903. He retired from the U.S. Army in 1937 to become a military advisor to the new standing government of the Philippines. He was later recalled to active duty in 1941 and made Supreme Commander of U.S. forces to the Southwest Pacific after being defeated in the Philippines and having to retreat to Australia. He was forced to retreat in March of 1942 to Australia, leaving behind his Philippine and American army, who were forced to surrender on the Bataan Peninsula and then forced on a death march hundreds of miles to where they would be held captive for approximately 2.5, if not 3 years. After 2 years of fighting in the Pacific, he fulfilled his famous quote promising, "People of the Philippines, I have returned." And finally, General Douglas MacArthur was there to help accept the final surrender of the Japanese in September of 1945. The other major leader of the Pacific Theater during World War II that I would like to touch base on is Admiral Chester Nimitz. Admiral Chester Nimitz grew up part of a poor family in Texas. He accepted an appointment to the United States Naval Academy in 1901 and graduated in 1905, 7th of a class of 114. But this was only after he was denied an appointment to West Point to become an Army officer, which was what he always wanted to do, because his congressional district no longer had any appointments to West Point. In January of 1909, he began instruction on the first submarine flotilla, where he became one of the leading researchers and developers of submarines for the United States Navy. After commanding 2 other submarines in November, leading up to November of 1911, he was made the commander of the 3rd Submarine Division of the Atlantic Torpedo Fleet. Then after that, he was executive officer and commanding officer of several other ships, including 2 battleships between the world wars. 10 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, he was selected as Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet with the rank of Admiral. As rapidly as materials became available, Nimitz shifted to the offensive and defeated the Japanese Navy in the Battle of the Coral Sea and in the pivotal battles of Midway and the Solomon Island campaigns, where he launched several amphibious assaults on Japanese strongholds. In December of 1944, Admiral Chester Nimitz was granted the title of Fleet Admiral of the United States Navy, where he later would become the first Fleet Admiral of the United States Navy. In the final phases of the war, he attacked the Marianas Islands and was able to capture Guam and Saipan, which were pivotal areas that held air bases which could launch Super Fortress B-29 bombers to attack the main islands of the Japanese Empire. He was also able to culminate his long-range strategy and launch effective amphibious assaults of the now famous islands of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, where many Marines and Army personnel died. Finally, Admiral Chester Nimitz signed the formal Japanese surrender aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, which was a true slap in the face to the Japanese, considering that the USS Missouri was the only battleship that survived the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. And in conclusion, now that you have met two of, in my opinion, the most pivotal and important leaders of the Pacific Theater, I hope you do research on your own to learn about these leaders, but also learn more about the pivotal and interesting war that was fought from 1941 to 1945. I hope I have spiked your interest in these wars, and I hope that I was able to interest you in some way. The documentation for this knowledge comes from the Military History Channel, myself, because I've done a lot of research on World War II, and World War II by a U.S. history professor at Duke University.